Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for another episode of Two Economists and a Lender, where we take a deep dive into those most important economic issues facing agriculture. I'm your host, Carly Jacobson. David Widmar and Brent Gloy are back with us here from Agricultural Economic Insights, along with our lender expert, Lindsey Haskell. She's a financial services officer out of Northeast South Dakota. I would consider today's topic, family living, to be somewhat of a challenging topic. It's easy to put our heads in the sand about family living expenses, and quite frankly, it can feel personal when family living is blamed for stress in the operation. Today, we're going to talk about some foolproof ways of staying honest and alert when monitoring family living expenses. So, a couple of quick housekeeping notes. I'm excited to be here today on the second anniversary of our first episode in the series. So, whether you've been with us since the beginning or checking us out for the first time today, we want to thank you. I know my perspective and mindset has improved just for being a part of the series. So, Brent, good to have you back. 24 episodes strong.
Yeah, it's a little bit hard to believe, Carly, that it's been 2 years since we first started doing this, and we have covered a lot of different topics over the years. And I must admit, this is one that I never really wanted to tackle because it's a hard one to talk about. But I think we're right to do it because it's super important. And I'll never forget, when I was in college, one of my professors once told us that, there are two sure ways to become rich. And that was to make more than you spend and do it for a long period of time. And second, to spend less than you make and do it for a long period of time. And, I thought, oh, haha, that's real funny. But honestly, there's a lot of truth and a lot of wisdom to that. And family living can be really, really important in our operation because when you think about it, if we want to have resources to grow our farm business, we have to have excess savings in there, and we can use those savings for a variety of things, grow our business and plan for our retirement. We can take the family vacation, and all of those things are super important to do over the course of your life. And so what we wanted to do is just talk a little bit about the economics of family living, give you some ideas about how to better think about it in our operation. Because one of the things that I think is that these fixed expenses, and many of our family living expenses are just that, they're fixed, and they're difficult to measure, and they don't change much year to year. But over a long period of time, those little changes can really add up and kind of be a little bit surprising. And so just think, what did a car cost 10 years ago versus what it costs today? And that inflation of that car has probably only been 3 or 4%, but in dollar terms, those get really large over time. And so we want to help you think about how to manage that and how to keep a handle on it and keep a good estimate over it going forward, because this can create a lot of tension in the farm business, especially if we have multiple families in one business. Kind of operating family living expenses can be a source of tension. And I think it's important just to have a better understanding of it. Second, it's very personal, and everybody's going to make different decisions about how much to consume today and save and all of those kinds of things. And so we're all different, and it's personal, and these are personal decisions we have to make. So it's not that we can't tell you what the right trade-off is, but we want to at least admit that it's personal. But we want to start by getting a sense of just what they are so that we can measure and take some of the emotion out of it. And unfortunately, I think too often these things get put in that bottom drawer of our desk, the too hard drawer, where we put those things that we just don't really want to work on, or we don't know. And I said, it's kind of a little bit like, me with the dentist. I don't like going to the dentist, so I don't go. And then you don't go for a year, and then you don't go for 2 years. It gets harder and harder and harder to go because you put it off for so long. It's just one of those things we want to pull these things out of that too hard drawer and get to working on them right now. So the first thing I'd like you to do is take out a piece of paper. And if you're sitting at your desk, take out a piece of paper and a pencil and write down the answers to these three questions. And these aren't, the quiz isn't going to be graded. It's no big deal. But what we'd like to do is at least get you thinking about this. And one of the ways to get you thinking about it is to exercise that muscle that in your brain that makes that pencil move. And what is your annual family living expense? So, some of you may know right off the top of your head. If you don't, let's put an estimate of it down. Second, do you think you're above or below average in your family living expenses? And third, what do you think that average expense is in dollars per year? So for an average family, what do you think the family living expense is? So 3 questions. What's yours? Are you above or below? And actually, what do you think the average is? And then we have a poll for you. We're going to actually have you answer this one on the computers. That's
well,
pretty
I
good.
never expected this outcome.
No way on earth. I don't know how on earth that happened. That is crazy.
We have a very good group here. They are literally very representative of everyone out there. 50-50. Very impressive.
That is an awesome distribution. David and I were betting before, and I mean, I'll be honest, I think we're usually pretty good at this, guessing what the responses will be to these polls. And we were both guessing that most people would say they were below average, like 60 to 70%. So you surprised us a little bit today.
And we'll talk a little bit about that in the Q&A section. There's an idea that makes us better, a mental model that we use a lot. And so we'll talk about that a little more towards the end of this. But it's really important, and Brent mentioned earlier, the too hard box. There are oftentimes really high returns for tackling those really hard projects, those really hard concepts. And so the goal of putting this together for you today is to say, hey, this is something that it's difficult, but if you pursue it, we want to give you some ways to start pursuing that. We think it's going to be very high value for you, and it's going to pay off really big dividends. And so to kick this off, we have split this topic into kind of two buckets, 2 ways to think about it. The first one here is, what are all the resources that your family consumes? So this is your total family living expense. And in a little bit, we're going to talk about what share of that number does your farm need to contribute. But right now, we're just going to do this is a kind of a bean counting exercise. What are all of the resources utilized by the family household? And what makes this difficult, as Brent alluded to, is there are some hidden variables. The first one off the bat are shared expenses. So there might be business-owned vehicles that you use in your day-to-day job on the farm, but you can also use those for going to town or going to a ball game. And so similar for utilities, there might be one electric meter to the house and the farm and the barns and the grain bins. And how is that shared? Similar with property taxes. Then there's some of these even more hidden ideas. If you have off-farm income that could be contributing, such as health insurance or retirement, those can be another part of this variable or of this total family living expense that just is hard to really process and to take in. So what we want to encourage you to do is think about this much more than just the idea of take-home pay. There is a whole lot more that goes into this category than just what the net is after everything gets pulled out of that off-farm checkbook or the actual transfer from the farm to the family itself. Now, to help you benchmark this a little bit, we've looked at, there's 2 data series. There's a lot of folks out there that track this. So hopefully this gets you started, but we want to give you a few ideas to get started. The first one is out of the Kansas Farm Management Association. And this is family living expense. So they've gone out and they've tried to capture, again, all the resources consumed by the family. And they have looked at this, and in 2020, the average was $72,000. And I would guess that a lot of you had written down, what do you think the average is? Something less than this. This seems like a really big number. But again, it has calculated all the things that we've talked about before. Now, there's one thing missing here, and that is the income tax component of this $72,000. So you would have to pay income taxes on all that $72,000. So this is actually maybe a little under if you needed to put this into your farm budget. So let's talk about the $72,000. Go ahead, Brent.
I was just going to say, when you look at this chart, it's really quite interesting because this is one of those examples where we said, these little changes add up over time. And you see that back in 2000, those family living expenses were, let's just call it 35,000. Today, a little over 70,000. So, that's a big change. But honestly, that's only probably about a 3 or 4% annual increase, David, over that time period.
3.7.
Yeah. So that's really not that big, that much of an increase, a little bit faster than inflation, but not a lot. And the other thing to notice, I think, is that big, it slowed down in 14 and 15 when we had, the rough years in the farm economy. Things have turned around in the farm economy a lot, as we talked about last month. We might expect those things to start sneaking up on us and increasing quite a bit here in the next few years. So it's something to just keep in mind, be aware of, that it's probably going to start sneaking up on you, and we want to pay attention to it.
So the second thing I'll point out, Brent, is the value's gone up $10,000 just since 2010. And so this idea, the rate has slowed down. It's somewhere around 2% over the last decade, but it's still growing. This idea that you might have done a really good job of calculating what that family living expense was a decade ago, and then you sort of walked away from it, and it has slowly worked its way higher. And this is true for everything that happens in our lives. The second thing I want to point out is that this is average across hundreds of families in the state of Kansas that belong in this association. And on average, there's about 3 members to the household here. So as you can expect, there is a big difference for how this might play out based on the number of family members you have or the number of children that you have. And so this is sort of a starting point to help you dive into this and to help you start thinking about it. And the follow-up that we're going to provide, the follow-up email has a link to this recording. We're going to share an article that we wrote on our website that dives into these data just a little bit more. So help you sort through that a little bit in more detail.
David, one question somebody asked, is that per person or for a family of 4? And I think it's family of 3, but
it's a family of 3. So it's the average across all these members in this association, and on average they had 3 members in their household. So here's the second data set. It's similar. Okay, it's average across all these families. This is in Illinois, and here the average is $84,000. So I guess as I was looking at the data, I was like, man, 72 seems a little high, especially since we don't have taxes in there. So I went to look at another data set, and it's actually a little bit more, 84,000. Again, income taxes aren't included in this. But this data set gives us a look at what happens over a decade. Again, slow rates of change played out, about $10,000 of increase over a decade. But this data set also provides us a range here. So they've ranked everybody from high to low, and those in the top third had an average household expenditures of $144,000. Those in the lower third had $57,000. So there's a wide range here of how things play out. And it's interesting because we were talking about this as we prepared, and I looked at it. The number of family members doesn't really vary a whole lot across the average versus the top versus the lower. So this difference isn't necessarily driven by the number of household members. There's a lot of factors that play into this. So we wrote this article. We linked to it in that follow-up email, so you can read a little bit more about that. So the next step here is to ask the question, what portion of your family living does the farm need to cover? And this is the relevant question when it comes time to make your budgets and your projections. This is what, as you think about, you're a business, and as you think about what are all the expenses that the business needs to cover, what portion of the family living does your farm need to cover? What is that expense? And when you think about it from the business perspective, this can be widely variable. And so if on one extreme, your farm can cover less than 100% of that total family expense that we saw before. So for example, if you need $80,000 a year, so there's off-farm income that's helping meet all those needs, your farm might need to cover less than $80,000 per year. On the other hand, if maybe you're investing in some outside business or another type of activity, your farm could need to contribute more than 100% of that annual family living expense. And finally, the third point is, in some cases, that family living obligation that your farm needs to cover could be negative. So if you have a significant amount of off-farm income and maybe you're a young producer looking to grow in the operations, especially over the long term, this could be a way that maybe you're investing in that operation to help it grow. So the point here is to separate this idea of what is it that my family uses and consumes in a year, and then what do I need to what portion of that needs to come out of my farm business. Continuing on this idea, this thought, there's a few other things we want to share here. Is your operation, when you think about the farm budget, you only contribute so much contribution margin. And contribution margin is the difference between all your revenue minus your variable expenses. And this is part of the budgeting process, but you have this money that is allocated, these earnings that are allocated to the contribution margin, which are the things that you can cover all your fixed expenses with. So family living is one of those, debt service, machinery expense. And the idea that we want to share here is that your operation has some amount of economic activity that it can generate. And we have to have a balancing act between family living and debt service and machinery. So the idea here is a similar size, similar demographic of operations could have a different family living and debt structure or machinery expense distribution based on how they allocate their needs. And so family living is up there with all these other topics we've done previous webinars on. So we have to consider family living in the context of what is it that the operation can generate and what are the other needs that the operation needs to generate as well. And the third point here, which is really important, is if we don't do a good job of calculating and managing it, it can become what we call a black hole calculation. So if we don't have a really good idea where our family living expense is, our lenders or our accountants, they can help us calculate this, but get your Schedule F and what are the profits that were generated by this operation, and you compare your balance sheets and your changes in your equity. If we don't know where family living is, there can be a gap between these variables and these balance sheets, these financial statements, and we get a black hole, which is what's missing. Why? Where's this missing equity or these missing earnings? And that could be a way that family living gets backed into, and that's not the way we want to approach this. There's this idea of what gets measured gets managed, and we want to make sure that we're managing this. And if we don't, it becomes a drain on our resources and our operation. And we got to have our finger on that. And we got to make sure we're keeping an eye on that.
Yeah, we can tell. I mean, it can help size our operation as well. So if we don't have enough contribution margin, one of the things to do is to increase scale and scope. But we'll come to that in a second.
So a few additional considerations we wanted to share today are, this is a really important one. The first one is the goal here isn't to minimize the family living expense. There are some scenarios here where we just don't want to take this to the bare minimum. At some point, you should take the vacation and get away for a few days. But more than just that, there are other buckets of expenses here in the short run that can really help us down the road. So retirement, savings accounts, maybe a health savings account, or even a college savings account. These are all expenses that we might incur in 2021 that actually help us offset future expenses down the road. And retirement is a really important one to think about, because if we don't have a retirement, if we don't have a non-farm retirement account set up, that is implicitly saying the operation is going to need to generate and contribute to our family living expense indefinitely. Whereas a retirement account will help offset that as we get into the later years of our age. And so that's one way we can set that up. Same with college accounts. So we know that this expense might be coming. We can start spending today to offset that future expense. Another way to think about this is short-term versus long-term trade-offs. So if we want to renovate a kitchen here in 2021, we have some decisions. We can either take the big hit of that expense and pay it all this year, or maybe we might get a loan and pay that out over several years. One of those really causes a spike in our family living expense for 1 year. That's maybe hopefully temporary. But then the other decision here is we're going to put ourselves on the hook for a payment into the future. And so we got to think about the implications of that. Step 3 is family living creep. This is the idea that we've talked about. Not only does that sort of inflation over decades come into play, but there's also this creep that comes into play as our lifestyles change. So I think the best example here is thinking about the next generation. So they might graduate high school or college, and they're using a farm vehicle. They're maybe still on their parents' health insurance. They got a modest home in town that they're renting, kind of a bachelor pad, and they really just need $20,000 or $30,000 a year in walking around money, and that might work in your farm budgets today, and that might actually work really well. But we got to think long term that this sort of low cost of living situation when you're 20 or 24 might not be sustainable as you start to get more family members and start to get older. Also keep in mind the income tax piece that we talked about. And finally, to reemphasize this idea of take-home pay logic, this idea of if we're thinking about, do I keep my job in town or do I get this money from the farm? We got to look beyond just the take-home pay. There's other factors contributing more than just the salary on a monthly basis. So we put together a little checklist here, and this to get you started. And Lindsey's going to join us, our lender expert this month. And she really helped us for this first one. It's to separate the accounts, maybe separate the checking accounts and the credit cards. So we're going to talk about this a little bit with her. Then there's track family living. So get started tracking it right away. And then finally start to plan for the future. So with that, we're going to jump over and have Lindsey join us here for the expert portion of our conversation. Lindsey, thank you so much for helping us prepare for this.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for having me.
So tell us a little bit about yourself. I know you're from South Dakota, but tell us a little bit about some of the hats you wear.
I am a mother of 3. I'm also involved in my family's cash grain and cow-calf operation. This is my 15th year as an ag lender. So I sit on both sides of the desk. Family living is just a really interesting topic to me. I started tracking my own family living about 4 years ago and was kind of physically sick when I ran the report the first year. It just takes a lot of money to live and raise kids. So this is something that I've really honed in on and tried to manage. And especially as a lender, this is something that when we do reviews and we put projections together, we try to make sure we're accounting for this. We want to set producers up for success. And it's just been a really challenging piece.
It's kind of surprising, isn't it, when you really start looking at it, the numbers kind of blow you away a little bit. And I think it's not necessarily bad. It's just, it's more, I think, than a lot of people think.
Yes, it is. It is.
So Lindsey, I have a question on that idea is, what do you think makes it so difficult for producers to start to calculate that or start to manage that a little more closely?
Well, I think it's kind of almost a human behavior thing, and it's an emotional topic. I will tell you, when you sit down with, say, a husband and wife and you start doing these things, or say you're just sitting down with one of them and trying to do these things, one might not necessarily know, what the grocery bill is, and one might not necessarily know how much car insurance costs. And so sometimes we have to have a bit of, coming together and more open communication and discuss topics that aren't really fun to talk about. As a lender sitting at a desk with producers, it can be a tough conversation. If we find as we're going through things, maybe one of the spouses has, a high amount of credit card debt that the other spouse isn't aware of. And so they may think their family living expense is relatively low when in reality, it's higher than they think. And so it's really an emotionally charged topic. And it's one of those things that if you've never tracked it and you've never taken the time to look at, month to month what your expenses are, you just kind of bury your head in the sand and don't want to. And it's one of those things that is easy to put in the bottom drawer.
And it's just useful to start, though, right? Let's just get a baseline started, as opposed to, not going into it saying, well, there's a problem here, one way or the other. It's really good. Let's just at least get a baseline going forward.
So thinking about getting started, I'm curious, Lindsey, about some best practices that you've observed. And the first one I want to ask you about is separating the personal and the business checking accounts. Is it common to separate the personal and the business checking accounts?
It's not as common as I would like it to be. I think people get very used to, for 30 years, we've operated out of one account, and we don't want to break that chain of this is how we do it. There is, a segment of producers that do keep a separate household account. That is probably one of the easiest and quickest ways to get started with tracking family living. If you transfer, say, $5,000 a month from the farm into that family living or household account, and you find you can't live within that, then you have a better grasp of what my family living expense really is. And so that's probably the quickest and easiest way of doing it. That does make people uncomfortable because it holds them accountable to that. And it's measurable, and numbers don't generally lie. But it's not as common as we would like it to be, but that's a really quick and easy way to get started in tracking it.
So I want to remind viewers to submit their questions to the Q&A. We'll get to all those in the overtime piece, but Brent and I are economists, and so sometimes we like to study human behavior as microeconomists. And so this idea of just moving the money from one account to the other account is one of those, it seems like it's not that significant of a thing, but it really starts to change the behavior of how we think about it. So I think that's a really good piece of advice to reiterate and for you to share. And I appreciate that, because I think it's oftentimes an easy place to get started. I think you would even said that as a lender, you would be more than happy to help producers get that process started.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. If you can establish those separate accounts, we think it should be so easy to track. I mean, if you're reconciling your accounts, your statements at the end of the month to see, where you're sitting income and expense wise for the farm, you should be able to do the same for the household. But a lot of that stuff just kind of doesn't get accounted for. And a lot of people aren't truly reconciling. So there's a little bit more sophisticated bookkeeping that can go along with it, which isn't really fun and which takes time. But it's really a good exercise in knowing where you're at, especially if you are struggling a little bit financially, and if there could potentially be a size and scope issue with your operation. 150 cows and 400 acres, just isn't probably enough to support a family of 5. And that's where it becomes really challenging. It may have been that way 20 years ago, but today, the size and scope of that just isn't enough. And so then we look at, are some of these producers underemployed? Do they need to seek some sort of off-farm or non-farm income to subsidize family living if the farm just can't support that? And sometimes that's where it comes down to, is once we can kind of pinpoint what family living expense is, and there are certain things you just can't go without. I mean, you have to have groceries, you have to have gas, you have to have insurance. So it's kind of a starting point for a lot of things in analyzing people's enterprises within their operation.
Well, that's great. I appreciate that's you sharing all those best practices. So, all right. So Brent's going to look through the questions and get that lined up for us. But I wanted to follow up on what we started with earlier. It's this idea that makes us better, which is some mental models that Brent and I rely on a lot. We write about these on our website from time to time. But there's this thing called the above average effect, or maybe we are more familiar with this from the Prairie Home Companions Lake Woebegone effect, where all the children were above average. And so the idea is it's very common to survey humans about above or below average, and our minds are very flattering to ourselves, and that's a good thing, but we just have to recognize that. So it's very common to see a survey of Americans, and they say, do you think you're going to eat healthier than average or less healthier than average? And they'll say, oh, I'm going to be better than average. And so this is a very common observation and phenomenon. Apparently not for this group of listeners today or viewers today. I've never seen a split 50-50 like that. But why is this important? Because if we really want to make significant improvements and progress, we can't let this above average effect or this above average bias get in our personal way of making meaningful improvements. So this is why we want to put this this webinar together for this topic. It's true across every aspect of our operations and our personal life, but I think this is an interesting effect that we just got to be aware of as farm managers, and we want to make sure it's sort of one of those red flags that come up. Like when we say, like, oh yeah, I think I'm beating the average. Well, let's verify that with some data. And that's what we hope to do today with the family living. So Lindsey, I want to get to my my last question here. It's a question I try to get everybody asked. It's the billboard question. So if you could share a piece of advice on a billboard for thousands of producers to see, what would you like that billboard to say?
Oh, that's a tough one. Well, for 2021, I would probably be very brief, and I would say, don't spend it. You know, since we've had the price rally, you know, we've seen $7 corn again, we've seen $16 beans. It is remarkable to me as a lender, the number of requests for shop loans, new equipment, bins, you know, that we have seen, because that rally in price just absolutely creates that level of optimism, and we're going to have this ability to cash flow. And people have really short memories. You know, we've had $3 corn for, you know, a pretty consistent period of time. And so now we have such an opportunity with this rally in price to rebuild liquidity, to kind of pad those coffers and help that financial statement stay healthy. Perhaps we will have $9 corn at harvest. You know, if I knew, I wouldn't be here. But I really think, you know, just trying to maybe heal up a little bit for some of these operations, get back in a pretty comfortable, solid position would be good. So don't spend it would be my billboard.
All right.
Yeah, I think that's good advice, Lindsey. It fits really well with the question that we have, which is earlier you showed a chart, you know, with the rise in family living expenses between 2000 and today, and they're asking why, you know, it went up pretty steadily until 2014, then basically flattened off. Why? Was it inflation? What was going on? And I'll take a quick crack at it, and you can probably add some more commentary to it. Is that, you know, that is roughly a time period when the farm economy kind of went in the tank, and you know, you could just see the tough times from like 15 on in that chart, and where, you know, I think people really were trying to cut back, trying to, you know, get by, because we just weren't making as much money during that time period. And now, as you've pointed out, we're in a different situation. And David and I did some analysis the other day, and I think, you know, even with the decline in commodity prices that we've seen, which corn is off, you know, what, 70 cents from its high new crop corn, you're still looking at contribution margins that are among the highest we've ever seen. So there is a lot of potential profitability there right now. And again, farmers are going to have the decision of what to do with that. And one of the things Lindsey's kind of encouraging people is let's use it wisely. Enjoy it. I don't think anybody's saying don't enjoy it, but at the same time, I think, you know, let's be prudent in how we manage it.
I think the other thing to take away from that data are, even when we were, you know, maybe holding back and trying to tighten the belt, quote unquote, we only saw $5,000 of adjustment from the high to the new low between 2014 and today. And I think the takeaway there is that once those expenses get brought in, it's hard to pull those out. And so we want to be careful in times like today, when there are strong profits, that costs are going to go up. Family living will probably creep up a little bit, and all costs will go up, but it's difficult to pull those back down, especially on the family living side of it. And so that's one of the takeaways I think we should think about from this chart, is once they go up, it's really hard to pull those back down for a whole host of reasons, especially on the family living side.
Yeah. So Lindsey, one of the questions I had for you is, as you're dealing with a lot of different families, what do you think is a reasonable number for a family of 3? I don't know if you can give me that number, but let's say a family of 4 with kids in, you know, middle, grade school to high school, what kind of numbers should you at least be thinking about in their budgets?
So, I would say for a family of four in South Dakota, probably about $75,000.
So right in line with that data that we showed.
Yeah. And, it really depends on if you are paying health insurance privately or if a spouse does have, employer subsidized, healthcare, because that's just a really big piece of it.
And these are some of the things that are really important to think about is what are those differences across, operations and things, do they have the retirement taken care of somewhere else? Do they have the health insurance somewhere else? Do they, is there another income somewhere else? I think all of those things can really be impactful on their personal financial picture as well, right? How big is the range, that you see? I mean, you see some really extremes, because honestly, I think of farmers, a lot of them I know are actually pretty darn frugal. I mean, everybody goes to the conferences and talks about, the person with the really high family living expense on the farm or whatever, but I would say a lot of them are living well below their means. And what is that accurate or not?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, there are definitely some operations out there, in 2020, 2021, I would say even for just a husband and wife, you're probably going to be at least $50,000. I mean, and that's when, pretty much everything in life is paid for. There's no car payment, there's no land payment, it's just strictly, and they're probably very frugal livers. I mean, not high living at all. I've easily seen a range family living expense, over $200,000 as well. And that's, a lot of travel, a lot of toys, lake homes, and some operations absolutely can and should, be able to enjoy those things. If there are challenges, that's some of the things though that you need to look at and rein in on though.
One of the challenges I think can get really tough is you have multiple families. One family, one account, all the family living coming out of one account. I mean, talk to us a little bit about how to do that, how to think about that. How can you, what's some best advice for that kind of a situation?
That is a really sensitive subject. There's a lot of operations that I work with that might be 2 brothers and 5 sons. And everybody, let's say, gets, certain percentage of the pie, depending on how that works. You have to be very good in what I would call strategic leadership and actually operate your business, your farm like a business and be very open on that, or you're going to have probably a breakdown in communication and the ability to work together. I've seen operations where say, there's 5 brothers and 2 of the wives work and they provide off-farm income. Well, if they're doing the insurance for the other 3, if the farm is subsidizing that, then the other 2 are getting reimbursed. There are a number of ways of doing that, but the most important thing is to make it black and white and not have gray area in that, because unfortunately, in any business, there's a lot of dysfunction. But especially in these family farming operations, there can be a lot if it's not treated like a business. And I've always said the farmers in the state of South Dakota, they are larger than 90% of the businesses on Main Street in Sioux Falls. And those businesses generally have a staff that handle these things for them. And so we have these producers that are wearing the hat of agronomist, vet, mechanic, PR, HR, and they're trying to do all of these things. And it's really important that we operate these farms like businesses and don't just treat it as a lifestyle. And so I think we really need to have kind of a shift in human behavior if we want these operations to be successful long term.
Right. And even that lifestyle thing, even if you operate as a lifestyle, it works okay as long as everybody's got the same vision as to what a lifestyle is, right? where you get into real big differences of opinion over what is an acceptable lifestyle, that can cause a lot of problems.
Special thanks to Lindsey for joining us and helping us think about this. As Brent said, this was kind of in our too hard box over the last 2 years of episodes. So I'm glad we got to it. I think we had a good topic and a good guest. So thank you so much, Lindsey. Carly, let's finish this up.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for tackling the topic. I've been wanting to do it for a while, so I appreciate you going in with me on this one. So that'll do it for another episode of Two Economists and a Lender. Thank you to Brent, David, and Lindsey for leading today's conversation. And for you in the audience, thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you online again next month.